Welcome back to Virtue Vibes. I'm really excited. Today we have the first conversation that I'm going to be doing, and we're going to be talking about homelessness. So, you've probably been in a situation where you've encountered a homeless person on the street or in some setting, and I'm sure there's all sorts of thoughts that run through your mind about what to do in this situation or um, what to say, or should you give money or items, or is there any danger involved, or is there awkwardness involved with if you were to make eye contact or something, you wouldn't want to get their hopes up. All sorts of things like this might run through your mind. And we've all been there. And I kind of want to just talk about that ethical situation. What do you do in those situations? And I have here with me today somebody who is somebody who has been working with homelessness and with the Maricopa County in Arizona. He's been doing this for about a decade in various forms. He's worked with different homeless shelters, battered women's shelters, with crisis call centers, and he's helping to allocate the money in Maricopa County now towards different homelessness efforts. His name's TJ Reed, longtime friend, and I really love and respect TJ. He's somebody who is very thoughtful and has a philosophical mind, who's also able to pair that with practical action. And that's something I just really love about TJ. And I'm really excited to talk about homelessness with TJ today. So, TJ Reed, welcome.
Thanks, Jared. It's good to be here.
So, before we jump into the topic of encountering homelessness, can you share a bit of your background in maybe slightly more detail than I could? What got you into this, and what are you doing now, and why are you so passionate about homelessness?
Sure. Well, um, I think in terms of education, I grew up wanting to be a therapist, and I got my undergrad in behavioral health. And then as I worked at that domestic violence shelter that you referenced, I realized that my skill set and really my interest was more on the macro side of things, of policies and decision making, that there were things that I felt in that programming that needed to be changed to really support people. And so I went down the route of getting a graduate school focus in social work and public administration. Um, and really kind of the rest is history. Went into lots of work on just management around homelessness. All of it has been in Phoenix. Um, but I will say, like, outside of the technical stuff, I always think of a story when I was in high school. We did we were in Guadalajara for a mission trip, and um, we went to this area that they told us there was trash stacked up high all over this area, and it smelled terrible, and the police wouldn't even go there because it was so bad. And that's where a lot of people were staying and experiencing homelessness in their own way. And um, when we ran into folks there, the guy who led us there was like, "Hey, this is we're going to give some food, we're going to give some water to folks down here." And we went in, and I remember helping this gentleman who had some severe disabilities and couldn't really talk well, and I helped him walk over to this bench, and I was like, "Hey, man, do you need some water or drinks?" And he couldn't really respond. And what I just kind of was at a loss. I was like, I don't know what to do for this person. Like, clearly he needs water. They're like, they have rags with paint thinner that they're putting in their mouths to numb the taste, right? So they don't feel
Jeez.
hunger. And and I remember at that moment, this gentleman who had led us over there just came over, grabbed the gentleman, leaned him back on his arm, and poured some water into his mouth. And I was kind of awestruck by the way that he handled the situation. But what stuck with me, and stuck through to today, is that I wanted to be the person who just knew that he knew this guy. He had been there 100 times probably. Knew that he just had to like pull this guy's head back, right, and put water in his mouth because he knew him that well. And so that always stuck with me, that as like I didn't want to be the person who would just go out occasionally and like kind of dabble in the waters, that I needed to get really neck deep in this to fulfill like what I think is what I wanted to do with my life. And so those are kind of the both sides of it, with kind of the natural progression for me, but also then the education and experience side.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like once you were like confronted up close and personal with this issue in a very like human way, uh, it kind of became more tangible or something, or more motivating. Because that's one thing I think for a lot of people, this is an out of sight, out of mind type of
Mm-hmm.
issue. It's something that's, the homeless folks kind of gather in a place that you don't see, and you kind of just hope that someone's going to take care of them, and hope that it's not going to be near you, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But it sounds like once you were placed into that situation, it gave you like an experience to be able to uh, kind of have some of your heartstrings pulled, and some of like the need made tangible, so that it seems like it's been really motivating for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just something that I realized early on for myself, that for me, a job had always been related to something that I knew I wanted to dig in a human services or social service sort of way. And so that was
Mm-hmm.
my expression of that value. Whereas other people, uh, in different circumstances, can absolutely have a different way of experiencing and navigating the world, without having to obviously get into the work in this way.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So yeah, I want to transition to what the experience of most of my listeners will be, because most of them won't be working in these areas, and some of their primary contact with homeless people is going to be when they're walking down the street, or when they're in some public transportation, or outside of some store. So this is a situation in which these two different worlds might meet, and I kind of just wanted to talk through some of the ethics of those encounters. Um, so one thing that happens in a lot of these cases is, you're asked for money, and a lot of people are worried about whether they should give money. Will they just go use the money on drugs? Is something you hear a lot. Or um, should I give food instead, or should I give information, or should just not give anything? So a lot of people think through what they should do in these cases, and I just wanted to kind of hear some of your take on it. Like, for example, the using money to buy drugs thing. Um, if you had to give some kind of a rough estimate, what percentage of homeless people do you think would use any money you give them for things like drugs, or things that would harm them, rather than just going and getting something needed like a meal or something like that? Is that a justified worry?
Well, I think that to answer that question is really tricky, right? Because I mean, there's some research out there, right? And some research will say a couple of different things. One would be that actually a lot of people who are on the street asking for money are not experiencing homelessness. So they
Mm-hmm.
may be people living in apartments. Um, and well, I'll give you one example. So one of the things that came up a lot, people on disability, through the government or through veterans services, right? Who they are getting checks each month because they have some sort of disability that prevents them from going into the workforce. One of these gentlemen, who is asking for money on the street, years back, we had talked with him, and we're just like, hey, what's going on? Like, are you experiencing homelessness? Do you need help getting into shelter? And he's like, no, I live right up the street, but I'm on disability, and for me to maintain my disability, I can't work more than a specific amount of hours. And but to maintain his housing and to get food, he didn't have enough money through that disability checks to really, especially with escalating rents, right? Like our
Mm-hmm.
rents, even just over the last few years, have risen by over 68%. And like,
Yeah.
and I think I wouldn't even have to tell that stat, right? Because everybody feels it. Like anybody who's renting
Yeah.
or knows somebody who's renting is like, it's crazy here. Um, but for that person, their justification for panhandling was that if I work more than the hours that I'm working now, I will lose my disability. And I can't really work that much anyway because of my disability. And so the only thing that I can, like, in that mind was logically is to just do this thing. Um and I mean, talking to people too who have panhandled in their past, I would just ask like folks to really start from a space of empathy. That like think for yourself, like what it would actually take for you to ask strangers for money, and like that happens to every single person who's panhandling as well. They're not like a different human on a, from a different planet. It's the amount of pride hits and the amount of thing that you have to go through to be willing to ask strangers for money. It is unfathomable to most of us, I think. And also I think we're going to get to this a little bit later, but that like not only just asking for money is a hard thing to do, especially for somebody who's served our country, right? But it's also, you get met with a lot of distaste, disrespect, people not treating you sort of subhuman, right? And so the what you have to go through to even do that, I think it is an enormous thing. So for me, there are statistics out there of people experiencing homelessness and the rates by which they're using substances. But the reason why I start with focusing on that, some of these folks and many of them in a lot of cases are not experiencing homelessness, is to kind of share that myth, and that like it's like anything else. If you're looking at somebody and you're wondering what they're going to do if you were to give them money, um I'm naturally, for me, like I'm naturally going to have a distrust. Like I am a skeptical person by nature, so if I'm giving somebody money, unless I know you really well, it doesn't even matter if you look really great or you look terrible to me. It's like, I don't know you. Like, you could be somebody who is going to use it poorly. You could be somebody who's going to use it great. There's studies out there that a lot of money from panhandling goes to things like food and home. But, you know, I'll just speak for myself, right? It's like, I'm still skeptical to give to somebody because it could be that one where that person goes to, buy drugs or do something nefarious with it. Um, but I think that's important for people to understand, is that the nuances there of the situations, and um, that not everybody is experiencing homelessness, and it's absolutely not always just somebody trying to get their next high.
Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah, and I've I would say I've had an encounter with homelessness myself. I'm not even sure if you fully know about this, but uh, just to speak to the point you were mentioning about how sometimes you could think like, oh, like somebody's on the street, they must have gotten there by using drugs, like making poor choices and not working hard. And I kind of got confronted with a very different reality when uh, I was homeless as somebody who had been working hard, had never been on drugs, and had been just a very hardworking student. So, in my time in philosophy, I was focusing on my work. I was an excellent student, straight A student, my whole higher education career. And I had a mental breakdown that was related to my future career track. So I was worried about whether or not I should keep going down this route of becoming a professor, and if that's the way I wanted to do ethics, and if that would be a stable route for me, if it was going to be a secure position. And I was just dwelling on this nonstop. It led me into this depressive state, and I couldn't function anymore. I had a hard time writing emails. I had a hard time doing all the essays and academic work that I had done my whole life naturally. And so, yeah, I did well still. I graduated from Virginia Tech with a master's degree in philosophy. I went to USC, and starting the PhD in philosophy. But my mind had gotten so anxious and worried and depressed that I wasn't really there. I wasn't present, and I wasn't able to take care of logistic things. And I actually was homeless for a couple of weeks there. I didn't have money to get into some of the housing. I was sleeping I was sleeping in the student offices at night, hiding from security guards, locking the door, and just like, yeah, like beating myself up over like how in the world did I get here? Like how in the world did I get to this point? Um and yeah, it was a really hard time to go through for sure. And it kind of uh just opens up your eyes to there's so many different ways that people might end up homeless, and I got to experience that with struggles with mental health. Other people experience that with uh you know financial things. People get in a car accident, can't afford the medical bills, end up homeless, or different things like that. So there's just, I think there's a wide variety of people who end up in these tough situations. Um, and yeah, I think that's just really important to remember when approaching homeless people or when engaging with homeless people. There are going to be people who have just made bad choices, and there's going to be other people who uh, are there because of very unfortunate circumstances, and you just don't know. So it seems good to like lead with some charity or some benefit of the doubt or something like that. Um, but yeah, so
Yeah, well, I
yeah.
mean, thanks for sharing, man. I know that is like it's such a tough thing and but so vital in these conversations to be honest and to dig into some of the pain of these situations cuz like to your earlier point, right? Like when you distance yourself from it, it's just some random person who's inconveniencing you. But when you put yourself there or you've been there, like your situation, the amount of empathy that can come up of like, oh my God, like, yeah, I had to spend some nights in the office and you've seen yourself as somebody who, yeah, who's worked hard and done what you're supposed to do, right? And there are thousands of people who have different situations than that, but who end up in situations that are they would have never thought themselves to be in. And I think that's the biggest thing out of I can almost assume, even though I don't know where the rest exactly where the rest of this conversation is going, but like that empathy is arguably the most important thing, not only for this topic, but almost anything else. Because if I can distance myself from you, I can treat you very poorly. But if I can
Mm,
see myself in your shoes, or I can at least understand the circumstances, even on like a high level of why you're doing what you're doing, I can look you in the eye. Like I can understand where you're at and show you respect as a human of like no, like I'm not just better than you and I can just like put my nose up, right, and walk by because I've done that
mm-hmm,
and like full admission, right, I've done that before because I'm like, oh, I'm doing fine, like I have my own house, like I have education, I have a job. But as soon as you do that, it doesn't feel good, and it's not real either. That person is a person with a name, with a background, with interests, who had promising life just like you did. You're right, and they find themselves where they're at, and they absolutely do not just want to be in the same space that they're at right now for the most part. Like so,
mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, on that note, on empathy, another thing I wanted to talk to you today about. Um, this seems like a minor thing, but I think it's actually really important. So even things like eye contact. When you're walking down the street and you see a stranger, if they're somebody who looks like if they have a house and they look like they have a job, then people seem more willing to smile or share some warmth with that person, to
Mm-hmm.
make eye contact, and to um yeah, maybe even uh have a small conversation or something. But there's this phenomenon where people, once they see that someone looks grungy or homeless, you overlook them. You don't want to make eye contact. You don't want to show them any warmness. And there's a few different reasons why that might be. You know, some people might just be genuinely the snooty, like looking down on them. I'm better than you. Like get out of my presence, kind of thing. But other people might just feel awkward. They might just feel like they don't know what to do or say, and they don't want to, you know, if they look at the person, that might give the person some hope of giving them money or something like that. So they try to, you know, not get their hopes up or something. Other people might be worried about um, like violence or aggression or anything like that. Um, so that's yeah, that's something that I haven't had to worry about. I'm a pretty tough looking guy, and I never really walk around in the world having to
Yeah.
worry about things like that. But I could see that other people might um, have that more in their mind, so they might be hesitant to do things like smile or greet a
Yeah.
homeless person warmly. But yeah, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on uh, this phenomenon, like of holding back warmth and just the general kind, small little gestures that we would gladly give other strangers who look like they have a home, that we withhold from people who don't have a home?
Yeah. Um, well, and I think a lot of what I'll be sharing with this, and then like actually in the actions of should you give or should you not, a lot of what I'll say, I feel like is more of like a proverb that I feel like it's true like 90% of the time, but there's always
Yeah.
exceptions to these types of things because again, I've only see life through my lens as well, similar to yours, that you may not have to worry about safety or risk as much. And I think for starters with that, if people are fearful in a situation or their, you know, intuition or whatever is telling them that this is unsafe, do what you have to do, right, to feel safe in that situation, whether you're because
Hmm.
I've had I think I may have had one situation like this with, and it was with Ira, right, my son, and so whether you're alone or whether you have your kid or something, like do what you need to do to be safe, right, and um in that moment that's a hard thing. But what I would say though is overall, and even after those moments, like checking in with yourself and seeing like, why did I feel unsafe in this situation, or was there genuine risk, or was it just that somebody looked, you know, you had kind of clothing that didn't was dirty or something like that. And so overall, I would say absolutely, it's not even just for homelessness, that the more people can kind of break out of the silo of our individualism and focus on like the fact that other people have lives and are not just walking around trying to inconvenience you. They're trying to get their needs met. They have their own situations and needs and pain and story. And that
Hmm.
the more that we can show respect and humanity to people, the better our world will just generally be. That if I can look you in the eye and even just give you a nod or a smile, that like, you know, in talking with folks over the years, honestly, I've heard that from so many people that it's like one of the hardest parts about being in this situation is simply the fact that people look down on you, right? Is that
Hmm.
people will look at you, if whether you're panhandling, whether you're at a food bank, whether you're at a shelter, that they're looking down on you, that they are better than you. And I don't know if I would encourage like the listeners to just ask themselves, have you ever had a moment where you felt genuinely looked down on, or diminished in some way by somebody in a power position or somebody who you're close with, or even a stranger, and like the feelings that come up in those moments are awful, right? Of a feeling
Yeah.
that you are less than, feeling that you are not even like to the point of subhuman, but just like that you do not feel powerful, you don't feel valued at all. I think think about that, but then feel that like every single contact that you have with somebody over time, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's one thing that I would just say is like we get empathy fatigue, right? Even this happens with me all the time. There's so many things in the world now, and there's so many things that we're just because of mass media and production that like we know what's happening across the entire world. This is like the first time in the history of ever, right, that or in the history of the world that people can know exactly what's happening in a part of a completely different part of the world and the pain and struggle there. So let alone homelessness here, where you consistently like, even if I wasn't working in this, I drive past people panhandling every single day. I see people in encampments or tents every single day.
Yeah.
And for me to really care and empathize with every single one of those, I would probably explode, right? Like
Yeah.
there's so much pain and stuff out there that if you were to empathize and truly dig into every single thing, we would die. So we get empathy fatigue of like, but what I would encourage is in these situations is like when you are able, challenge that and say, this person is not there to just inconvenience me. They are doing what they know how to do to survive in this particular moment. And the more we can even have like little spaces like that for ourselves, like for me at least, I feel so much better about my interactions with the world. And I know that other
Hmm.
people are going to experience that too. Because if you've ever experienced that, of feeling respect and honor from somebody, like the opposite of the other experience, it feels good to be truly listened to be acknowledged as a person, to be looked in the eye, to be respected. Like
Yeah.
I think universally everybody could be like, no, that's that's like a good thing.
For
I don't
sure.
know who would say that would be bad, you know?
Yeah. No, other people can definitely help you at a very deep level change your outlook, and
Mm,
we really rely on each other. Like, we're social beings, and that's hardwired in us. So like like you were saying, for me, even in those one situations where I felt like I've been looked down on, and then multiplying that out, it would take such incredible superhuman mental fortitude to just never be affected by that, and to never let that bring you down farther and feel worse, which feeds into your inability to get off the streets, because now you're even feeling more depressed and
yeah.
ashamed before. So I think it's a pretty vicious cycle. But yeah, but I like some of the advice that you give there about trying to push yourself at times, despite there being so many different things that are going on and so much hurt that's going on. Like, you can't fix all the world's problems, but we can do something
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. And I think for a lot of people, if you ask yourself, all right, like, in the area of like charity and just going out of my way to do something for others, what have I done lately? Um, I think the answer to that for most people is going to be not very much, or not as much as I probably could have. Um, and I think most people would probably feel better even about themselves too if they were to uh, take some more opportunities that come their way to show a little bit of kindness to strangers, or to whoever, or to do something for anybody, friends, family, that's not required, and just completely going out of your way to do that. So there's just so many. I think of them as opportunities out there. Like, you don't
Mm-hmm.
have to take all the opportunities. You don't have to, in my mind, you don't. I'm not saying you have to help every homeless person you see on the street or something. Like, pull a blind side and you know bring the homeless child into your house and raise them up into a superstar football player or something. Like, that's not feasible. But you can do something sometimes, and you can ask yourself, what have I been doing lately? And uh, yeah, I think if you're just honest with yourself, I think some really good things can come about from that. Um, I want to take a moment really quick to address some worry some people might be having about us tackling topics like this. And you mentioned how, your answers were kind of like a proverb that's like true 90% of the times. And some people might think that the kind of answers to these questions, like there are so many exceptions, and
Mhm.
like it's just not, you can't really uh, give good answers in this area, just because every different situation is different. And so how can you say anything about this that's true and, you know, uh, helpful? um, there's not a way to be precise, black and white, give you the rule book, here's what you follow every
Mhm.
single time. So that might be a critique of like kind of the way we're going about answering some of these questions. But I wanted to mention just a little bit about how I think about ethics and some of the value I think there is in rules of thumb. They can be very helpful and action guiding, even with exceptions and different circumstances. So, for example, I think about like a rule like in American football, there's this rule of thumb for runners. They say you run upfield, like go upfield. Like when you get the ball, we're trying to go that way. Don't run backwards. Usually the other way is like go upfield. That's a good rule of thumb to help the team get to where they want to go. But there are some exceptions. Like if you got three people charging at you right in front of you, and this is the last play of the game and you need to pull something off, it might be worth it to go back a little and try a different route. Um, and so the rule of thumb, run up field, that's still a valuable, true insight, and it's a valuable, true way to analyze how to move closer to the goal that you're going for, even if there are all these exceptions. So when talking about ethics, I hope I didn't lose all my listeners who know nothing about sports. But so yeah, when talking about ethics, I think there's a lot of rules of thumb that are worth establishing, even if they have these exceptions, and it's going to be different in certain cases. Like you said, when you were with your kid or things like that, maybe it wasn't the best time to strike up a conversation with a certain homeless person that you might have had an intuition about them or anything like that. But that doesn't negate the valuable rule of thumb about trying to treat people in a human way and um, interact warmly, give them a chance at least. And uh, yeah, so I think I just wanted to mention that for people who might think this is too wishy-washy or something. I think rules of thumb could be some of the most valuable tools that we have when trying to live a good life. So I
Yeah.
hope people aren't put off too much by that. I think you can say true things even when there are exceptions.
Yeah. Well, and Jared, I think that kind of leads into a, like a good question of like what should you actually do outside of these kind of more um like empathy and thoughtfulness and respect and kindness, right, are more their values. They're not necessarily actions in a very specific way, because it's like those things you can derive an action from, like being kind,
Mm-hmm.
where there's like a kind action or an unkind action, but at the same time it's more of like a framework. But like the way that I've talk with folks about this is that, like, for action, okay, you're now at a stoplight, somebody is right next to you, they have a sign up that says, hey, I need money for lunch. What do you actually do in those situations? And for me, like, and what I think a lot of folks in the sector would recommend is, or a good place to start is actually the Healthy Giving Council. There's actually a group of folks who have come together to say, how can we do a little bit better? Because providing food on the streets that's not connected to services, giving just individual $5 bills out to folks, um, is that resolving functionally the problem of that we're experiencing in our society? And many would say no, right? Of that is not really getting to it. But so the proverb here of the 90% is, the Healthy Giving Council has a site that you can actually donate money to specific organizations who are in the space, who have infrastructure. So, as an example, you can give money to like a St. Vincent de Paul who does food, right? They provide meals per day. they have food handlers cards, they have a structure of how they make their meals, they have, they have all this where your money can go way farther with them than it can by you going to the store and buying sandwiches even. Or you can
Interesting.
give money to an organization that provides services or anything like that. And what that does is it allows people, rather than getting money that's separate from any connection to other things that they might need, many of these service providers are trying to connect to other really valuable things like, oh, hey, now that you're in our food line, let's talk about getting you connected to benefits related to paying for your food outside of this. Oh, let's get you
Yeah.
connected to services where you can find a job that works for you that you can now afford to get into your own space. Let's get you the mental health care, the substance use, anything, right? And so connection to entities that are doing the work is such a great pathway for people to take to not only maximize where their money how their money is being spent, but also that it's really building into the system to functionally support people addressing all their needs to getting out of homelessness. But that's the one thing that I'll say, and to probably the irritants of some would be that that's the 90%, right? Of like, I would say that generally speaking, as the proverb of like, that's kind of how I view these things. However, I am not going to be as pompous or high horse to say that like you should never give money to anybody, right? There may be a
Hmm.
case that you just run into somebody and for whatever reason you're like, "Man, this really just hits me. I want to pay for this person's gas. I want to give this person um I'll just give them the money, maybe, or I'll go into the store, buy them a sandwich or buy them some food. Like there will always
Yeah.
be those cases that I would recommend that, if you're feeling that way and you have that and a gut response or something that you're just like, man, this really, I just feel like I should help this person right now. Like don't let anybody tell you otherwise, that that's all right. Like if you're having a
Yeah.
moment of kindness, when you look back on your life, that's probably not going to be one of the moments that you're like, damn, I wish I didn't like help that mother and their child get a sandwich, right? Like that won't be the thing that you regret, right? But
Yeah.
overall, I would say that 90% really is getting into the infrastructure of services that are already there to help people out. And there are so many that, whether you're Republican, Democrat, whether you support different philosophies of life related to how people got into this, there is an organization out there who you can connect with that is in alignment with your values. And so that's kind of that side of that. So overall, like summing up kind of what we're saying here is like, what I would recommend anytime as a human you're having empathy and you're thoughtful about somebody's experience and you're just being kind, you're being a human to other people, right? um,
Yeah.
but then in your actions it's really focused on connecting to stuff like the Healthy Giving Council and connecting to that infrastructure and something that aligns with your values. But never shy away if there's just a moment that you really feel like, man, I want to do something for this person right now in front of me. Like, and there are people in my space who would be like, please don't say that. Like, please make sure people go to the Healthy Giving Council and like
Oh,
don't give
really?
any other options, right? Because people really want people to be connected in. But like, I can't say that being as a human. Like, I know there have been moments where I just see somebody and I connect with them maybe, and it's just like, man, I really want to help you in this particular moment, and
Yeah.
and
One
that's
hundred
that.
percent. Yeah. And I also think like we're not robots, and so in a way too, like when you have these personal interactions, rather than just a uh, automated amount coming out of your bank or some uh, impersonal donation, when you're tangibly helping somebody, it can remind you of why this is important. It can move you and make you think more about this issue than you would have otherwise. It can inspire you to uh, look into other things or for future interactions. Like there's just so much to the personal form of helping and like charity that it does seem uh, yeah, a little strange to say, hey, like we want you to go into full robot mode, completely throw all that out the window, because I just think there are so many interesting subtle effects on you and your
Mhm.
outlook as somebody who's helping, that I think are worthwhile, even in those personal cases, even if you are um, using the majority of your giving or things to go to some of these other effective organizations. So
Yeah.
that's really interesting. I hadn't heard of that website before. I'll be sure to put it in the show notes.
Yeah, well, and just one other tag for that too is what you're describing as well is that personal touch. When you go to this website, there are two buttons that you can press, right? One is donate, one is volunteer. So also don't
Hmm.
forget that there are ways for people, whether you're retired and you really want to be involved like 40 hours a week or like 20 hours a week, or you have 30 minutes per week or something like that, or one time per month you want to go, you can volunteer or donate your time, right? And really be involved in a way that is different too. So
Yeah. And is this just in Maricopa County, or is this like throughout the states or just certain
this
cities?
is for the state, so it's I believe it's for, I think it's primarily focused, this one in particular is primarily for Maricopa County. I'd have to
Okay.
double check, but I believe there, some of it might be for the state, but overall they're, depending on where you're living, um look up stuff like this, right? You can, I'm not going to be an expert in every single place in the country
Yeah,
obviously,
for
but
sure.
like there are lots of places that focus like this, where they have consolidations, they have like coalitions or councils or something in a community that pull together nonprofits to say, like, if you want to give, here's a good list of them. If you want to donate your time and volunteer, here's a list of nonprofits or whatever that you can connect with too.
Gotcha, gotcha. Interesting. Um, so I want to transition now to another kind of interaction. We've been focusing on like giving and different ways to help if you feel moved to help. And I want to transition to another kind of interaction that you might have with a homeless person. This is something that you suggested that we talk about, which is what if a homeless person uh, interferes with your property in some way, or if you're a business owner and they're on your property or ruining things or loitering or whatever it may be, or in your home or anything like that. So in this case, it's not about you making a decision to go and have a good interaction and give or something. It's they're at your front door. A lot of people's default is to call the police if something like that
Yeah.
happens. But yeah, what do you think about that choice?
Yeah, and the reason why I suggested talking about this is because this is just another like very practical way in which this is coming up. I've worked with multiple businesses of like, and there was actually a New York Times article, right, about Arizona of downtown Phoenix. There is a couple who had owned a sandwich shop, and that was their life. And they woke up every morning doing that, went to bed every night doing that, right? And over the past few years, it's gotten really bad where street homelessness around the area has impacted, and I would encourage everybody to check out that New York Times article, and I can maybe share the link with you afterwards, Jared.
Sure.
But what this article did, and I think this is kind of a microcosm of how to expand this out, is that like it really provided a space for empathy for both. That as a business person, it is impacting your business potentially if somebody is shouting outside or throwing a rock, or there's like a fire or something that's caused by somebody else, or they're coming in and they're making your workers uncomfortable by, somebody's maybe talking to themselves really fast, or maybe they're high and there's no real engaging with them in a certain way. Like that is hard. And so I'm not going to come on here and just be like, oh yeah, well, just like don't worry about it and just
Yeah.
kind of keep going. Don't think about it. It's fine. Because like it may not be fine for you. And there have been businesses that might have closed for stuff like that, right? Because
Yeah.
it just gets too out of control. But on the other side, like understanding, I had a conversation um, with somebody who runs a business near one of the places that uh, we have a shelter, and they're impacting um, that business slightly. And we just had a moment of like empathy of like, I hear the vitriol, the anger that is coming from you, and like I want to acknowledge that, But the way that some folks are talking about this is that, again, it's kind of going back to that point of like, these folks are inconveniencing me in my life, right? And it's almost this, that like this world kind of revolves around me, and that this person is in its way, and that like in this space they're not trying to mess with your business, right? Like the people doing this are trying to get their needs met, or there's something else going on there. And so how can we come together to resolve that? Like I think I gave an example of, there was a woman who I had chatted with, and um she has a name, right? And she uses substances, and has mental health issues. And if you were to see her on the street, it would be almost like one of those stereotypical circumstances where you see somebody mumbling to themselves in tattered clothes, and it's just like, a lot of times the first gut reaction is like, okay, that's homelessness, like I'm gonna back away. But like when we found out about the stories behind that face and the tattered clothing, of that, like she was an educated person who did have anxiety and mental health issues at the time, but she educated, worked. Um, she was in a space though with an abusive relationship, right? And then so when she got into that abusive relationship, she stopped working, right, and was out of work for many years, and was becoming completely isolated and reliant on that person. As soon as she got
Mhm.
out of that, she had finally came to terms with like she couldn't live in that situation. And like many people stay in those situations for far longer than they wish they would, but it's tough to
Mhm.
get out of when you're completely reliant financially and socially on somebody else. So
Mhm.
she finally got out, had nowhere else to go, so she ended up sleeping on the streets, right? It's cold or hot, you're experiencing all sorts of dangers, right? She was sexually assaulted, and she realized that it was going to be a regular occurrence, so she started using drugs to numb the pain of what it feels like to be sexually assaulted, right? She would use uppers to stay awake at night to protect herself, right? Like, I mean,
Mhm.
and long story short, she became addicted, and substance use will oftentimes exacerbate or make worse any mental health issues that you have. And so she's at the space that she's at. I don't pull any responsibility from her to say that like, oh, she's just a complete victim of society or whatever, and she has no personal responsibility. But at the same time, can we take a moment to empathize for somebody who has to actually make a decision whether they would be sexually assaulted with or without drugs, right? Like that is
Yeah.
a terrifying reality for some people in our community. And the reason why I think of this story is not to just like bring up some end of the bell curve crazy situation to be like, come on, empathize with people, businesses understand, but it's that like every person has a variation of this type of story, and there are many reasons similar to each of us. If we were to look at our skeletons and really be honest about the things that we do in our life, we all have reasons why we're doing those things, whether we like them or not. We're trying to survive, we're uncomfortable, so we do things to numb that pain, right? And like
Mhm.
I think the quote that comes up to mind is from C.S. Lewis, and I did pull it out over here just to, because I could never say it as eloquently as him, but like he talks about like suffering, and that the only thing we can really do with suffering and pain is to suffer it, right? And it's like it doesn't really matter whether you grip the arms of the dentist chair or let your hands lie in your lap, the drill drills on, right? And for these situations, there is nothing comfortable about coming to terms with the reality of someone's situation on both sides. That for the business,
Mhm.
it is uncomfortable and costly to them. For the person, it sucks that they are in the situation that they're in. And as a society, we have to come together, the businesses alike, the nonprofits, the government, and the people, to see how we can really resolve this stuff. So as a business, I would just recommend like to reach out to your cities, reach out to the county, reach out to others, the nonprofits in the space who can support here, to figure out a better solution for everybody, right? how can
Hmm.
we make sure that your space is not completely disrupted, but let's not also do that at the detriment of somebody else. If we just arrest the person, now they can't just stay in jail forever, so they're going to be released. Now they have something on their record, which makes it harder for them to get jobs, harder for them to get into housing, perpetuates them being on somebody else's porch, right? So
Yeah.
it's a society thing. But I hope that, again, similar to where we started, it starts and ends with empathy. That if we don't have empathy, there's no way through these complex problems, because we will never be able to understand why somebody is inconveniencing our life, right? It's
Yeah.
that frame that I think screws us over.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, that's really heartbreaking to hear her story and the moral dilemma that like a business owner might face when this person's on their property or doing anything that might mess with their service. Um, I want to. I'm trying to think of how to say this without sounding like an awful person, but um,
Good start. Good start.
yeah, good start. So we talked about earlier how there are so many situations where people are hurting and in need of help, and uh, and that we can't be everybody's savior, or we can't fix everything ourselves. And so, like, I'm thinking of this situation with this homeless person who's on business property, and then I'm thinking of other situations too, like the angsty uh, teenage boy who just is into graffitiing things, or into like you know doing drugs outside of your business area, and uh, they're ruining some of your sales, might be messing with some of your property. This person probably doesn't need to be arrested either. Um, they probably need some mentorship in their life and some place to help them understand how to navigate society and to develop, you know, uh, into like a moral person. And there's a ton of cases like this where, as a business owner, all sorts of people, not just homeless people, all sorts of people might interfere with your business. And, maybe, you're saying people should know or be able to research who to call for which situation. But I can also see the merits in having like a somewhat of like a catch-all number, like I
Yeah.
really love to help here, but I can't right now. I have a bunch of work to do for the rest of this afternoon, and so I'm thinking of 911 not as like a I want this person arrested, but as like a uh, this is a one place where I can call, and hopefully they can figure out and connect the right service or the right people rather
Yeah.
than the business owner. And yeah, I know. Yeah, for a number of issues, I think people have been talking about whether we need, police for the situations, or whether we need different mental health providers or different things like that. And I'm just wondering, on the practical level, as the business owner who doesn't know all the numbers, doesn't know all the services, if this should be routed through, something like 911, and then they can be the people who uh, connect to the appropriate services. Does that seem like an okay paradigm, or do you think that 911 is just like not doing that well right now, or?
Well, it wouldn't be necessarily like not doing that well. I think 911's a service that uh, is meant for emergencies, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
um, I would I would pose like opportunities of just like what is more appropriate. Like I wouldn't call my you know I wouldn't call the police for an issue that is not a safety concern, right? And so, one
Mm-hmm.
thing that I would start with, I would say actually 211 is a nice place to start. It's an information and referral hotline that can help with just like
Hmm.
identifying what resources are available. Um, but
And is that an Arizona thing?
That's actually a nationwide thing, but there's a local one for Arizona. So anybody in the
Okay.
country should be able to call 211 in their local area, and it will route them similar to 911. If you call 911 in Phoenix, it will route you to the Phoenix police department, right? Where if you call 911 somewhere else, it will do the same. So 211 works very similarly. Um, but I would also encourage businesses to check out their neighborhood associations. Like you can um, they're probably already aware of some of those because many neighborhood associations or business groups are um, kind of connected, and in those connections those are the great spaces where it's less about a service that can just be done and more about a conversation of like, what are the things that are really irking you, what are the things that are really troublesome that you're experiencing as a business person who's trying to run whatever business it is, right? Because there's a billion different types of business. um,
Hmm.
and so with that, then you're able to kind of share your feedback and identify solutions to those problems. Like this example that I have, we're working with a neighborhood association that is having regular meetings with us and trying to figure out practical ways of like, how do we just keep this area clean together? Like, all right,
Hmm.
maybe we can volunteer some time. Maybe we can work out just different opportunities, right? To work for the neighborhood and not just for that particular business, or not just for the homeless folks. It's a um coming together to make it work for everybody, right? Because it's not just it's it's not somebody else's problem necessarily, right? It's all of our problems as a society to figure out how we deal with some of these things. Or
Hmm.
at least that's how I view it. Some people may differ in their philosophy there, but for me, I do feel like uh, our individualism sometimes drives us away from communal help and being able to
Yeah.
support our neighbors. Like, I love the fact that my neighbor can come over and be like, "Hey, man, like, I'm struggling here. Can you help me out?" And it's like, if he didn't trust me or didn't know me, he wouldn't do that. That's very rare, right, and uncommon. And so, I feel like in this space, the more that we can be like that in our communities, the better it is for everybody, not just for the homeless person, but for our businesses, but for our governments, for our police, even because police don't want to just be dealing with these types of things all the time either. Their
Yeah.
specialty is keeping people safe. So when they're going into this space that they have to deal with something that's not a safety issue, it's just a matter of somebody like, if somebody's sleeping on your porch, or somebody like graffiti, to your example, it's not like somebody's in danger with the graffiti. It's just
Hmm.
annoying and it's getting in the way of business. So figuring out other alternatives. Unfortunately, because there are listeners that are going to be in a lot of different areas, I can't just say like, oh, there's one thing. 211 is about the closest I can get to saying that something applicable to everybody. But in each local area, there are different options for you, and that could be something that um, your, like, even just your city departments can help you with a lot of times.
Gotcha. So yeah, this is a great transition to start thinking about some of the ways that we can collectively tackle homelessness. I think a lot of the things we've been talking about so far have been about personal giving, about what should you do yourself when somebody interferes with your property or anything like that. Um, and I think there's a whole other way that we can tackle homelessness. And I think that we need to be able to, that's collective action, whether it be through taxes and what those taxes end up funding, or, yeah, different organizations, shelters. What, as a society, do you think are the most, so let me put it this way. In your mind, what are the most exciting, helpful, uh, useful ways that we can tackle these homelessness issues? Because we can only do so much at the individual level. We need to have some larger infrastructures and group actions in place. So I know this is a lot of where your work's focus, if I'm understanding correctly, is you're helping figure out which projects to fund, which
Mm-hmm.
shelters to fund, which groups are going to make an impact, and trying to do that in a thoughtful way that's, yeah, making use of analytics and things. So yeah, in your mind, what are you most excited about, or what do you think's important on this collective level of addressing homelessness?
Sure. Well, I think what excites me most, honestly, is just the collective part of that. I think one thing that confuses folks is that, like, I don't actually think that the problem is for us to focus on homelessness necessarily, because homelessness in and of itself is not really a thing, right? So you're not just homeless. Like, there are other problems that are preventing you from being housed, right? So,
Hmm.
like, you don't make enough money. You have severe disabilities which prevent you from I mean, a lot of it is around finances, right? Because you're unable to sustain a place. But there's also lots of other things too. And so the thing that I would say here, and just to keep it broad and not get into too much of the weeds, because I could talk about this for probably far too long, is more that, like, each in every sphere or sector, there is thought of collaboration and how do we prevent slash end this to have a continuum of services, right? So, like, if you think about healthcare, how do we make healthcare as accessible as possible, so that people do not get buried in debt, who do not have to get destroyed by premium costs, to just afford things that they need to stay healthy? How do we even think about social determinants of health, right? Social determinant of health is things that, like, impact your health. That are not directly related to health, right? So, as an example, your home might be problematic. So, a social determinant of health could be like, hey, well, I realize that you come into the doctor's office every other week with a cold, but we just realized that you're in a home that doesn't have heating and it's 20 degrees outside or something like that. And it's just getting, I mean, that's a
Hmm.
terrible example for Phoenix because nobody knows what 20 degrees is here, right? We're all like, yeah, it's cold, it's 80 degrees, but the idea of, like, there are things that impact our health, right? And so,
Hmm.
figuring out how to address all of those things. How do we make school more accessible? How, like, having lunches for kids at schools? How do we support parents in having the ability to have childcare for work? Like, so it's, I don't say that to overwhelm in the sense of, like, listing out 100 topics. I just say that, like, if you think about any particular topic that you're involved in or sector, so working, healthcare, school, education, all of those have facets that can be preventative and sort of residual or treatment based to support people in maintaining housing. And then the biggest one I would obviously say, which I couldn't have this conversation without saying this, is that, like, housing affordability, right? So this conversation, I think, sometimes can catch people off because it's like, no, I don't want some slum ghetto in my area or whatever. Um,
Hmm.
but affordable housing now, I say affordable not in the technical definition, but more of, like, housing that you can pay for, is happening to more and more people now. That more and more people are paying more than 50% of their income to just live somewhere, which is, like, before it was like, hey, the ideal is you're spending 30% of your income on your housing. That, I don't know almost anybody who is doing that right now. Like, many
Yeah.
people are spending more than that on their housing, and it's getting more and more unaffordable, to the point
Hmm.
where we're talking about, like, where it caught me. I was having a conversation, or I was hearing from a mayor in our community, right, of their daughter who just graduated school and is trying to find a job, cannot find a place to live in their community because it's too expensive. We have nurses, teachers, police officers, right, who are unable to pay for housing in the place that they're providing their service. And if
Yeah.
we don't see that as a collective problem of, like, oh, that's kind of messed up, then how do we resolve that? And I'm not even talking about, well, I won't go into talking points of, like, minimum wage or any of these, like, political things. I would just ask you to think about that, right? As, like, if housing is not affordable for people for jobs within that community, how is that fair, or how is that sustainable? Right? You're going to lose people and you're going to have more and more problems based on those issues, right? And so, collectively as a society, each of our sectors, specifically housing, we need to be able to make it sustainable for people who are in that community to just live happy and healthy lives. And so, rather than bringing it specifically to homelessness, I would leave it there because
Hmm.
I think we can all relate to that in some senses where we felt some issue related to one of those. Healthcare is tricky, housing is tricky, workforce
Yeah.
is tricky. All of these individual topics are massively complex, but also have ways in which they can support or build up resiliency in people to not have to end up in a situation where they're sleeping on the street or in a shelter.
100%. No, that's some great points, Teach. Um, yeah, that's a beautiful place, I think, too. And that was some excellent conversation and advice, and just being able to tackle and work through these issues together with you. Uh, I feel incredibly lucky to have you in my life. And I always tell people, even when I was in philosophy and ethics classes, I always wished I'd just like had a little pocket TJ with me, like, because I was always wondering, like, what would TJ say about this issue? Like, so I really respect you and the work that you're doing. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on the Virtue Vibes podcast and just sharing some of your insights and thoughts and questions. Yeah, it's been a pleasure, TJ. So
Well,
thank you
thanks,
so
man.
much.
I'm very humbled by all of that, and I would just say I'm glad you're doing this and making us think a little bit harder about some of the things that we're experiencing every day.
Thanks so much. We'll see you, TJ.